The best use of AI is actually informing people to make better decisions and to make consistent decisions. That's where we find success, and that's how we think about AI.
Welcome to the Self-Insurance Podcast, brought to you by CRMBC. Today we're joined by Ben Burch, data scientist and associate vice president of Midwest Employers Casualty. Today we're talking about AI. Hi, Ben. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Hi, pleasure to be here.
So, Ben, you're going to talk to us a little bit about AI in work comp. But before we dive in, will you give us a little bit about your background?
Sure. So I work at Midwest Employers Casualty. I lead a team of data scientists there. I've been employed at Midwest Employers for about 12, 13 years at this point, building machine learning models and AI solutions.
And a lot of people, when they hear the words, that hear AI, they are afraid and they think it's the end of the world, or some people think it's never going to happen. And there's so much fear around AI. Before we dive into really about how it applies to work comp, will you please take some of the fear out of it? And what are you referring to when you're talking about AI?
Sure. And I think the fear is rational, right? There's a lot in the news. AI is going to replace everyone's jobs. The truth is, especially in the insurance industry, like it's not possible right now for AI to replace everyone's jobs. The best use of AI is actually informing people to make better decisions and to make consistent decisions. That's where we find success, and that's how we think about AI. In fact, internally, we've rebranded AI. It does not mean artificial intelligence at our company. It means assisted intelligence. What we're trying to do is empower our claims adjusters, our underwriters, and our business partners with the right information at the right time so they can make better decisions.
And I know at least at CRMBC, we're very focused on AI and tracking AI, and it was one of the really the big selling points for our partnership between Midwest and CRMBC. Can you tell us a little bit about how AI can help with workers' compensation?
Just the insurance industry in general, most of the insights you need to make good decisions, especially for injured workers, it's locked away in what we call unstructured data. So these are things like documents and notes written by claims adjusters, notes written by doctors, and typically a claims adjuster or a physician has to read mountains and mountains of information in order to find what they need in order to take the best action for the injured worker. What AI helps us do is get through that information quickly to find the insights, to make the good decision, to help the injured worker get back to work.
And we've obviously talked about that there's some decisions that are really good to use AI and some are not. Give us some examples of what is a good AI application and what's not.
So the problems that are best suited for AI are the ones that involve scale, repetition, things where the AI is going to do more of a like a text scrubbing function or something behind the scenes. Any decision that needs people, right? That needs negotiation, that needs nuance, that needs care and thought, that needs to be done by a person. AI is not there and probably won't be there for a very long time.
Such as, give us an example of what you're talking about that requires care of a person.
Sure. So if you're going to make decisions about the future treatment of an injured worker, right, or talk to them about the way they're compensated, things like that, that should be done with people. That should not be automated by a machine.
But in terms of just reconciling the mountains of data that they're getting, AI can help to consolidate, simplify, get everything in one place so that if you're talking about an individual person, you're not relying on their memory or their, if they've got too big of a caseload that they forget something, the AI can help bring everything to the forefront. Is that kind of the idea?
Correct. I'll give an example of one of the things that we see. So we're an excess workers' compensation insurer, right? So the types of injuries we see are usually we are first notified about the injuries several years after they've occurred, and they're complex. A lot has gone on. So sometimes what we'll receive from a third-party administrator is a stack of PDFs, right? A stack of PDFs that's 10,000 pages in maybe it's in chronological order, maybe it's not. And our claims adjusters need to be able to figure out what's going on, with this injured worker, what's happened in the last year or two, and kind of where we can help, right? And so being able to do things like deduplicate the information, kind of hone in on the what I call like the inflection points or the places where you can really impact, and advocate for change, right? We want to surface that to our employees, right? So they can get there sooner and not, spend 3, 4, 5 days reading through these thousands of pages.
And how does this relate to unstructured data? Is this crossing? Is it similar to what you're talking about in structured data?
Unstructured data is it's text data. It's anything that you wouldn't put like in an Excel spreadsheet. Structured data you can think of that way, right? Things that they can put in tables. You can make nice little charts with them. Unstructured data is things like text, video, audio, stuff that's very hard to analyze. And this is where tools like generative AI really shine.
And so for everyone doesn't, and our audience probably doesn't understand what you mean by generative AI.
Sure.
Can you explain that briefly?
How generative AI differs from things like classical machine learning and other AI from the past, decade or two, is that what generative AI is trying to do is provide you with an output that you will like based on your input. So if you ask something like a chatbot a question, the goal of that chatbot is to give you an answer that you will find helpful. That it's important to know that there's not thinking going on behind the scenes. That model, your ChatGPT, is not following your instructions. It is giving you a response based on what you've put in that it hopes will resonate with you. Now, this just so happens to be very helpful when it comes to dealing with unstructured data, right? So if I ask a question, if I'm looking for in insurance, I have all these medical reports and I want to identify, the medical history of an injured worker. I can use something like ChatGPT, a secured version, not a public version of these models, right? Data governance, data security is very important. You can use this to extract that information because a good response from these models is what you're asking for. It's important to know that there's not a mechanism going and doing that, following your instructions, which is very, very kind of heady concept a little bit. And it does explain though why you hear about things like hallucinations with these models. And that's because the answer you're getting from these chat models is what the algorithm, the model thinks will resonate with you. Right now, there's progress in this space where we start getting closer to these AI models following your instructions. And those are what are known as agents. So AI agents, you've probably heard about in the news a lot. That is when you start using these generative AI models to make decisions and then take action. So it's like if you're playing in something like Microsoft Copilot, right, or ChatGPT or Gemini or Grok or anything, and you start kind of chatting in one window, asking for a question, asking for a decision from that large language model, and then using it to do something else and repeat it, you're kind of making an agent. And then you have something that is following your instructions and taking steps. And that's where the industry is now trying to learn how to best do that sort of a thing, that agentic flow.
And there's some companies that are using agents to replace whole departments already, and that's kind of the one extreme. And then there's some people that are still just using ChatGPT to help write emails, and then there's everything in between. And like you said, in the insurance industry, we're seeing all kinds of different exercises. We're using it in different parts of underwriting, different parts of claims management, obviously in risk analysis and things like that. And really it's a lot of garbage in, garbage out. It relies a lot on the prompting. But since you opened the door to security, I'd like to ask you a couple questions about security, because that's a big issue, especially for us as an insurance company. We're a self-insured group. And so we love AI. We know it's the future. We know it's important. We know it's important to stay on top of it. But what are the steps that you guys are taking and that companies should take around security?
Yeah, I think the first thing we did early on was establish like a core team, right, that was in charge of governance and security before we enabled our employees with any of these tools. We had to have governance, we had training. We also have ensured that the implementations of these tools that we're using, they are also secured. So
Mhm.
for any of these products that we're creating or processes we're creating with generative AI, they're not using publicly available implementations of these models. They're using private implementations where we know that we're not leaking information to these providers, these model providers.
And what are there safeguards that can be used around like are there different safeguards you use for ChatGPT versus Claude versus Gemini, or is it pretty much the same? Is it internal on your side?
So, I mean, there's a little bit of both. So, strong vendor partners can help you with some of these safeguards. They'll put things in place, like they can host these models for you. Host means they run them in their own environment, as opposed to leveraging a product by a different vendor, right? That makes it private to your company. Um, the other thing is you can put guardrails on these models, right? You can make certain subjects forbidden. You can track what people are asking, things like that, and make sure that what you're using the generative AI models for, is business appropriate. All those sorts of things. I will say this space is fairly immature. From the industry, to be frank, a lot of it is using these generative AI models to monitor what's going on in generative AI. So it's a little bit what you call recursive, right? Like as you're sitting there trying to figure out if your generative AI models are doing what you need them to, right? You also have to make sure that your governance model is doing what it needs to do too. So for us, we do a lot of human in the loop. So there's still it's still a very hands-on process. We're not ceding any important processes to AI. Like there's just the risk is too high still. So there's a lot of vetting, a lot of creating test sets and making sure that we're getting the answers that we want.
And there's like we talked about already, touched on a little bit, the fear that people have that it's going to take everyone's jobs. And early data is showing that AI is being more utilized in jobs that, for lack of a better word, require a lot of education up front, or you're sitting in front of a computer. So like lawyers and CPAs and people who are doing stuff on a computer. But the risk of it replacing a lot of tasks in, say, a restaurant, we're a workers' comp restaurant group. So obviously robotics is already out there and robotics is going to be tied to AI, but that change is probably a little bit further down the road. Do you agree with those studies that are coming out that are saying that?
So I guess where I see, I mean, I think in large part I do, but it depends, right? So where I see the largest impact today, and I think the studies that you're referencing probably agree, is in the software engineering side, right? So there's a lot of opportunity to use these tools, these generative AI tools, to write code and to do software engineering, and it does a fairly good job. Now, whether or not you use that as a way to reduce workforce or a way to multiply your productivity, right? It probably ends up being up to the company, right? I know here, like we're very interested in the productivity multiplier side of things. So my team uses these tools and they can work through problems far faster. What I find though, and I think you'll see this in some of these studies, who benefits from these tools it's not the same across the maturity of these workers, right? So the younger worker versus a mid career and late career benefit differently from these models, right? And what happens is, and my biggest fear, honestly, is that if we don't keep proper training for our knowledge workers, what's going to happen is you're not going to have people who can vet these models when they're making bad decisions. So you really need to keep, again, not only a human in the loop, but you have to keep people paired with these tools and use them. Like that's what they are. They're a tool. They're not.
Yep.
Yep. They're not a person, right? And at least as of today, these tools can't get all the way by themselves. So
Yep.
you need to keep people paired with them.
So I'm curious because your Midwest is pretty far advanced in using AI compared to other companies that are still not really jumping into it. What are you seeing in the challenges are in adoption and getting people to use it? And 'cause like I said, I was at a dinner recently where some people were saying, "Oh, AI is not a thing," just like they, probably were saying the internet's not a thing. So, how is it in real life? How are you seeing adoption?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely depends on the person. If you mean internally
Yeah,
to MEC and people
yeah.
working there, right? I mean, a lot of it is bringing the business along for the ride. So
Mhm.
my team, right? We're not the core business, right? The core business of an insurance company is claims adjusting and underwriting, right? Where I call us we're ancillary, right? So
But
I have
critical
to
to us,
sure sure
obviously.
sure
We
sure
if
sure
we look at it, we look
right
at it as a stool. So we've got to have
right
all of these pieces. So
sure
yeah,
sure. I guess what I'm trying to say is my team has to prove its value, right?
yeah,
Like I'm not AI is not the core business, right?
right.
So that means whatever we build, whatever we're doing, has to resonate with the business and it has to be useful by the business. So very early on, you know, uh, with the release of ChatGPT, what was that in 2024, 2023? Um,
Mhm.
the way we approached it is hackathons within our company with the business. So we would take some claims adjusters, some underwriters, and said, "Here's what we're trying to do. How can we make this work for you?" And we just were deliberate about the paths we went down. The path wasn't here. I'm going to automate your job. It's how do I get you the information you need in a way you can use it, as quickly as possible and in a way you can trust, right? Because that's the big thing. Like you have to be able to trust the models. And what we've found over time, right? If I'm going to give you a prediction, right, from a predictive model, or if I'm going to give you the output from one of these generative AI models, and you read that and say, "This doesn't make any sense. I know so and so doesn't have this issue," or um, this is way off. We'd never price this way, or whatever. Like that erodes trust, and then like the mountain's so much harder for me to climb, right? To be
Mhm.
able to get my job done, right? So it's really around building trust and then proving that what you're doing works. And it's small steps in lockstep with the business. Not coming to them with these giant ideas out of nowhere.
Yeah. I think something you just said is just gold. Is that you guys are using AI not as your primary business, but to support the primary business, and that's what most people and most businesses are going to do. Not everyone's going to be a data science firm that is building AI. Everyone's not a Gemini. Everyone's not a Claude, and so this leads to the last thing I wanted to talk about is how can businesses that are not Midwest, so you're advising our listeners and our business owners that, and these are, we have, very from smaller restaurant operations to extremely large restaurant operations and brokers. How should they be thinking about AI in their business?
Yeah, I think the first thing you do is you start small and you think more about the problems that you're trying to solve, and then whether or not AI is a tool applicable to that problem. I think it's one of the things we still do here, right? Like we have issues that we're trying to tackle, right? Whether it's a process issue, like a administrative information processing issue, or it's a program we want to roll out with a customer, right?
Mhm.
That's the focus. The focus isn't the technology. And the number of times where I've started a problem that I thought, it's a technology problem, I'm going to use AI. And at the end of the day, it's not that complicated and we can get by without AI. Like you do that, right? It's
Yeah.
easier, it's cheaper. I will say one place where we have found a lot of success that I think is accessible to most people, and especially in the restaurant industry, is in looking at. Yeah, I'll just give an example. So I actually wrote this up in an article for the Claims Insurance Journal. Right, we were looking at a customer of ours and looking at their losses, across years. And one of the things we were doing was going through the notes taken by the claims adjuster and looking for incidents where we thought there might be a safety procedure that wasn't followed. And we
Mm.
kept it kind of that vague, right? I wasn't looking specifically for OSHA violations. I'm not looking to really do anything other than flag injuries that I would like to take a further look at, right? And so we did that for this customer. We were able to pull out, they had a deli and they had a bakery, and we could find, everyone who was cleaning a machine without a guard properly, everyone who wasn't wearing the correct safety equipment, everyone who was standing on a rolling chair to replace something on a shelf, all the things that you shouldn't be doing, right? And, the thing that really got me as we were doing this, is it took us maybe 15 minutes to do this effort. And if I would have sat down and read the claim notes for the 500 claims, this, it would have been half a day to do that.
And if you could possibly comprehend all of that.
Right. And I might miss some too, right?
Right.
Like,
absolutely.
But now I can create a graph over time of like the frequency of these events and like in which location are they not putting the guard on the machine, who's not wearing gloves, and I can get all the way down to a chart, and I can do that in an hour, and that's data like I've never had. Right?
Yep.
And that, to me, that's very powerful, right? So you can use these tools to do data analysis as long as you're not looking to have the technology do it all for you, but to be your partner, right? And say, hey, can you read this and take out these pieces that I want, do the data extraction, or can you clean this up for me? And I want a list of every person who's listed on this email, or I want a list of every location in this PDF. And then you can build data to find insights very quickly.
Yep. And we're actually even tying that into data that we're getting from the video cameras in the stores. We're looking at some experimental things with that. And where it goes with us is that it ties into litigation. So it's making our litigation outcomes better because we can use the data that we're getting through the AI, and hopefully we can reduce litigation or get claims settled sooner. So that's a perfect example of it's a partner. It's not designed to replace your core business. So
Yeah,
Ben, I can't thank you enough. This has been incredibly insightful and useful. If you could summarize in 1 or 2 sentences what you want our audience to know about AI, what would that be?
I think it's keep in mind that it's a tool, right? At the end of the day, like it's not a perfect technology, right? But it's a tool you have at your disposal, and it's not the only tool. And I think we're in this phase right now. There's the hype cycle where it is the only tool that we talk about, but it's still, at the end of the day, just a tool. And you can leverage it to make a lot of progress if you choose so.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ben, for joining us today. And I
thank you.
look forward to having you back on a future podcast. And I'm so glad about the partnership between Midwest and CRMBC, and look forward to working with you in the future.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thanks, Ben. For more webinar sessions and resources, visit us at crmbc.com. And if you have an idea for another topic, email us at info@crmbc.com.